All right, good afternoon and welcome to our second session of the Forum Summer Series. I'm Dean Miller, the President and CEO of PACT, the host organization of the Forum Conference. We're excited for this session. We're excited for the whole series. And to tell us a bit more about Forum, please welcome Suzanne Lentz, the Chief Marketing Officer for Forum host sponsor Anexinet. Anexinet has been a terrific supporter of PACT, of Forum in particular, and an incredibly growing organization based here in the Philadelphia region, serving clients broadly. Welcome, Suzanne.
Thank you, Dean. Good afternoon. Again, welcome to the second session of the Forum Summer Series. We at Anexinet are thrilled to be part of this new digital series and this panel, The Urgency of Digital Leadership in a Post-COVID-19 Future. And it really couldn't be more of a pressing subject. Anexinet delivers intelligent, secure applications and the infrastructure to run them on. And these days, our focus has been helping clients reevaluate their 2020 and 21 goals and helping them accelerate the transformation that needs to happen to secure the remote workforce, modernize their infrastructure, and to better engage the folks who really matter the most to them, their customers, employees, prospects, and influencers, as well as secure and streamline all the processes to accommodate this new way of doing business. You know, for over 20 years, this conference has been a go-to source of thought leadership on the digital transformation of enterprises. While we can't physically meet this year, we're happy to bring our community of enterprise leaders together on a regular basis throughout this summer series, culminating in 3 weeks of keynote content in October. Before we get started, allow me to review the basic house rules of today's program. Attendees' cameras and mics are not shared, but the chat window is open for all of your general comments. Please direct any questions to the Q&A window, which will be monitored throughout. Please have your mobile phones ready for a few poll questions during the program. Also, this webcast is being recorded. Today, I'm pleased to introduce author, academic, business leader, and innovator Scott Snyder, a partner at Heidrick Consulting, who will lead us through a discussion with Roger Cude, EVP of Humana, and Sarah Gretczko, Chief Learning and Insights Officer at Mastercard, to discuss how their businesses have been impacted and the steps they're taking to turn this time of disruption into one of opportunity. Scott?
Thanks, Suzanne, to you, Anexinet, and also PACT for making this panel happen. And super excited to have Roger and Sarah. I've had the opportunity to interact with both of them in the past. And I think even though both of their organizations are fairly traditional names that everybody knows about, Humana and Mastercard, I think both of these are examples of leaders who are kind of leaning in and really reimagining what the future of work could be like and driving some really novel programs within their own organizations. And I think you'll just see, even by their titles, they're not very traditional HR or even technology titles. It's really this mashup of this notion that the future of talent and the future of how organizations and operations organize and perform are very related. And I think as we get into this discussion, you also see that their approaches are unique and experimental, and they're really willing to continue to rethink it. And I think both of them would agree that there's no better time than now, right? I think we've all heard that phrase over and over again the last couple of months, don't let a good crisis go to waste. And I think both of these are leaders that certainly embrace that. Instead of playing defense, they're playing offense around what does that future workforce model look like? How can we build advantages in our business? So really excited to have both Roger and Sarah with us. And just before we kind of get into the panel questions, and we certainly want to hear them weigh in, I'll just kind of set a little bit of the stage here. So as much as we talk about digital transformation, and I know that's been one of the key topics of Forum for a couple of years now, we're still not getting there, right? We're still in this mode where most leaders and executives and even boards would say, 70% of them would say they haven't achieved the outcomes they want in digital transformation, despite spending an estimated $1 trillion globally over the last couple of years on digital transformation. So the input and the output is not matching the input, and somehow we're not getting there. And I think what you'll hear more about today is the human side of that. It's not the technology, it's not the process, It's how do we change the mindsets, the way we lead, the culture of the organization to lay the groundwork that we can really truly drive transformation across the org. And in the book, Goliath's Revenge, that I've talked about at Forum in the past, we talk about the 6 rules, having alignment around what your step change is in the future as an organization, balancing little I and big I, that continuous innovation around the core business, playing the current game better, and also the big I innovation to change the game in the future. You have to do both. Thinking of data as currency and driving a data mindset and data literacy across the organization is important no matter what industry you're in. Rule number 4 was this idea of opening up your assets to innovators outside your walls and tapping into those innovation networks to multiply your innovation capacity to keep up with this fast changing world. Number 5, valuing talent over technology. This idea of mashing up these new digital skills, these new ways of working with your institutional knowledge and expertise that make you unique and actually bring what you do to the market. And then the last one is reframing your purpose, probably more important than ever, given what's going on in the world, both socially and also from a global standpoint. What are you doing to change the planet and society, and how does that connect to your step change outcome that you're trying to drive as a company? So those were the 6 rules in the book, and they're not about the technology. They're about shifting the way we lead, organize, and behave as leaders and as a workforce. So with that, I'm going to open it up to Sarah and Roger, and maybe Sarah, we'll start with you and then go to Roger. But as you think about what's happened the last couple of months, which none of us could have predicted, at least in all shapes and sizes, maybe talk about some of the obvious and non-obvious things that have happened that you've seen that might be interesting to the audience around your workforce and your leaders.
Absolutely. And thanks for inviting me. I'm happy to be here and chat with all of you this afternoon. So I think what we found at Mastercard on that obvious side of your question is obviously the importance of digital. And probably like many of the organizations represented today, we've been on a digital transformation. And so the crisis wasn't necessarily about trying to adopt very quickly or set up new tools and technology. It was just that mindset piece that you talked about, which I think is pretty obvious, right? We're in a more distributed remote world now, and we need a workforce that can actually work in that way. So we did see the importance of digital being one obvious thing. A non-obvious takeaway for us, kind of a bright spot, is that we have noticed that silos are being broken down, and we're actually making decisions faster, getting things to market quicker than we were in the old world before the global pandemic. And obviously that's a nice benefit that we've seen that we're exploring a bit more to capitalize on and figure out how we can take some of those learnings that led people to behave in certain ways and change mindsets on their own, even after we are past this pandemic.
There are some bright lights to virtual work,
right.
as much as we're getting fatigued. Roger, how about you? Right. Some obvious, non-obvious things.
Thanks, Scott. Thanks, Sarah. And it's a pleasure to be with you today. The obvious ones I'll hit first too, because those are pretty straightforward. And that is the obvious ones were around how to get our workforce home. So just to give you some perspective, we've been on the digital transformation. We've been thinking about how we work digitally and how we work virtually. And about 35% of our workforce was work at home or some sort of mobile or flex style prior, if you just go back to January 15th, pick a date. And now we have about 95% of our workforce at home due to the nature of our work. And the obvious things were the capabilities that we needed to do that. It's the basic hardware, software, the soft phones, the virtual kinds of ways that we could help our employees work. The non-obvious ones were as we were doing our employee listening, we were hearing key themes in capability to work and availability to work. And those two things are not the same. And so we were starting to have to adapt a lot of our processes, our routines Sarah's point, the way we made decisions and so forth, to people were capable of working virtually, but they weren't always available to work virtually because of the family situation, the children coming home, being sent home from school and so forth. And so we had to really change a lot of our routines, which caused us to kind of break out of the traditional mindset that we had to do the work, and it caused us to think differently. And about 3 weeks into the new way of working, one of our senior leaders said, well, why can't we do this all the time? Because to Sarah's point, we were working very differently, and the crisis led us into a way of working that was actually much more effective and much more integrated. Now, some of that we won't be able to sustain because there was just an all hands on deck kind of feel to it, but there's some things there that we need to make sure we preserve.
Is there, and this is to both you guys, there's been a lot of talk, as we've learned, right, on both the good and the bad of virtual work. Some people say, well, you can't replicate the water cooler discussion, or the after the meeting in the office mentoring moment in a virtual world. What are you saying? Is that possible? Is it just, we got to change our paradigm of how that gets done?
I'll jump in first. I think
go ahead.
Go ahead, Sarah.
No, go ahead.
I think some of that's to be determined, Scott. And I'd love to hear Sarah's take on this, because we looked at just break it down into, well, what's the on-site kinds of things that we did and we really needed to be on-site for, and what were the sort of off-site things that we could do. And then if you then break down the types of interactions that you have, from formal discussions and meetings and so forth to informal lunches or other kinds of informal conversations. And then you have the ad hoc, which I think is, to your point, the water cooler conversation. The ad hoc is the casual collisions that you have in the hallway or the lobby. And so if you break that down, what we're trying to do is rethink how this new way of working, you can manifest all of those without trying to go back to whatever it was before. Because I think we were saying this, we've gone through to use one of Jeff Bezos' terms, a one-way door on this one. I don't think we're going back to store. And, I think what we see on the other side is yet to be determined.
Yeah, and I think I'm glad you said that, because this notion of serendipity, right, which people say, well, you can't have these random collisions in a virtual world. I just think we haven't thought hard enough about it, right? But Sarah,
and
how about you?
Yeah, I would agree with that, Scott. I think what we found is we now need to start thinking differently. So instead of trying to recreate the water cooler experience virtually, we need to think about a different type of experience, which gets us to that same outcome, right? Which is those serendipitous encounters. But it's not necessarily, and I don't know if other companies did this early on. It was like every day there was a virtual happy hour and a virtual lunch over Zoom, and the Zoom fatigue was real. And people finally said, I'm done. No more Zoom. I don't want to, Zoom coffee. I don't want to Zoom lunch. I don't want to Zoom happy hour. And so I think what we started to do was think of what is the outcome that we're striving for? And let's think of creative ways for us to do that, not just trying to take what was once physical and turn it virtual.
Yeah, one other idea, Scott, just real quick. Sorry, I talked over you there, but just one other quick idea is, and many companies have probably already done this, so I'm not probably saying anything you haven't done, but just using the food delivery services to have a team meeting. So have Grubhub just let people order. And so instead of trying to force a Zoom coffee or a Zoom lunch, just have the team leader buy lunch for everybody and let everybody order through the Grubhub and have the meeting at the same time. So it's kind of taking we tried to take what we were doing in the office to Zoom.
Yeah.
Now let's figure out how to do this differently. This creates a little bit of a wow moment for your team and others in it. So anyway, just an idea.
It's a little bit what retailers have been kind of struggling with for years to get to, quote, omni-channel experiences, right? Where the retail staff recognizes you when you walk into the store, but then when you're online, you get all the best of being online, right? The expansive ability to search for things. And I think this is all new. So we're probably at the early stage of the journey of what's the best of both worlds, right? We can optimize on. Very cool. Well, if we're good, Danielle, I'd love to run the poll right now. you could pop that up. And I think we're going to be going to Menti. So if everybody online could go to menti.com and put in the code 920581. And the first question is, how much has the current crisis accelerated your organization's digital transformation efforts? That should say, has the current crisis. And your choices are, not at all, somewhat, significantly, radically. So hopefully everybody can jump to menti.com and put in the code 920581. Be interesting to see where we end up. I don't think these answers will surprise us too much, but it kind of reinforces probably what we already know. And what's interesting is I've gotten the opportunity to participate in a lot of roundtables in different industries in different parts of the globe. And no surprise, companies that are in the tech industry, for them, they almost had to just flip a very soft switch to move to this model. And those are also the companies that said, we have no intention of going back to work anytime soon. But then you have traditional companies, and I know, both you guys do have frontline workers. You're probably in that hybrid model where you are wrestling with some of this stuff. So, and it has caused some of your thinking to accelerate and rethink, but it's interesting. Any reaction to that? Sarah, Roger? Probably reinforces what you already thought. You might have thought more in the radical.
Yeah,
realm.
I mean, when I read this question, I probably would have said on the external kind of customer facing side, we were pretty advanced and really pushing, obviously being Mastercard being a technology company in the payment space, all about, electronic payments. Where it has really accelerated our efforts, though, is on that internal side.
Middle of the organization.
Yeah. So when we went from 95% of our people in an office to overnight 95% at home, we realized what we actually needed in the infrastructure that was required and tools, many of which we had, by the way. So it wasn't about bringing on new tools. It was about changing the way that our people use the tools that were already in existence.
Yeah, it's great to be on this panel with Sarah, because Humana is almost the opposite. We were, like I said, about 38% in a virtual work environment prior to the crisis. So we were a little bit further down that path. In fact, we were starting to toy with the idea, believe it or not, that what was the threshold where you crossed a line to where it wasn't as productive to have 60% of your workforce virtual. We blew right through that and have demonstrated productivity, but we're slower on the customer side. If you think about healthcare and the way healthcare gets delivered, just like in a computer virus situation, the first thing you want to do is shut down your computer. Well, in a health crisis situation like we've had with COVID-19, is individuals and customers wanted to shut down their physical interaction with not only Humana members, but also their doctors and their providers, and even a lot of our in-home nurses. So we got pushed on the customer side much faster on the virtual side. And so virtual care, telehealth exploded during this time, as you can well guess, and so forth. So we really got propelled in significant, I would say almost radically, into the digital solutions for our customers. And we're still learning on the employee side, like Sarah is, but we've noticed the most change on the customer side.
Yeah, that's interesting, Roger. And you also have this very important intermediary, the healthcare worker, right? The clinician, the staff, and in many ways, they had to get the mindset that they could adopt telemedicine and it would actually make their life better, safer, more efficient, right? And I think this has absolutely produced a burst in that world for sure.
Yeah, well, we've challenged our assumptions there, Scott, to there were a lot of visits and a lot of things we did around in-home assessments and things like that we did face-to-face, and moving those digitally actually has improved the quality of them and at the same time put our employees at less risk.
Yeah, automation in the name of safety, pretty interesting boost. So I'm going to move to the next part of this topic. So obviously changing the mindsets in an organization starts with leaders. The leaders cast the shadow, they set the pace. I know you guys have both spoken a lot about this. We wrote some articles on what we call digital dexterity, this notion that it's not just digital leaders or those people touching digital in their job every day. It's every leader has the opportunity to be an enabler of transformation or a blocker, right? And we talk about this notion of a triathlete. Just like triathletes, you might have your best event like swimming, but you still have to be good enough at all three. You can't not do an event or you can't enter. So this idea that, digital dexterity, that you need to be able to look ahead and connect the dots wherever you sit in the organization, if you're running supply chain or HR or finance, and understand what those new changes mean for your part of the organization, be able to enable your team to execute with these new ways of working at scale. That's the driver part of it. And then leave enough space and bandwidth and time to go rethink your own function and reimagine it. So being able to do a little bit of all three of those is not natural for all leaders, but it would be great to hear, and somehow, once again, the stats aren't very, they're not very exciting, right? We're only at 10% of most organizations feel like they have the leaders and the digital awareness to go drive success in the future. So I'd love to hear your opinions on, where we are with digital leadership and what you think are the key success factors for digital leaders across the organization going forward.
Right, sir.
Sure. I'm happy to start on that one. As Scott knows, leadership is near and dear to my heart, having spent a bunch of my career in the leadership development space. So I think a couple of things, because there were, I think, a couple of components of your question there. The first is, I think, absolutely, we've noticed that there are these emerging capabilities, which, by the way, we wanted in our leaders in the past, but it wasn't as prevalent in a non-crisis time. And especially for an organization that I'm with, like Mastercard, times had been pretty good. And so even though, we had leadership development interventions, and we talked a lot about, diversity of capability, even things like digital dexterity, our people hadn't really been tested, and they're really being tested now, especially our leaders. So I think some of the things that we've been wanting to build in the past are just more accelerated now. So things like resiliency. Do you have resilient leaders? Learning agility, right? Connected to that digital dexterity, but can you quickly pivot and think about things, think about patterns in a different way, bring different patterns together. There's actually a great book I'm reading now by an author named David Epstein called Range. And it's actually fascinating because it really is about the importance of what they call range with it, which is this breadth of knowledge, not just deep specialization, but having the breadth of knowledge so that you can bring novel ways of thinking to new problems. Because this global pandemic is a great example of a wicked problem. And each of us just sitting, in our own kind of functional silo or role, thinking about it just in the ways that we typically tackle those problems that we used to encounter every day, didn't cut it anymore. And so thinking about how we can really help develop range in our people and have people value that struggle. I'm actually dealing with this with my own learning and development team at Mastercard, because they like to come and show me all the great feedback we get from our programs. People love it. They had such a great time. Our NPS score is off the chart. And I say to them, well, did they learn anything? Because we know learning happens in the struggle. And if everyone's coming out of there like they just had a Disney World experience, I don't know how much they actually learned. So I think it's some of that stuff changing the frame a bit. And then obviously how we're measuring things like leadership capability. I think we need to rethink that. So getting to that, I think the second part of your question around, a stat you threw out around organizations not having the leadership that they need. I don't know that I would agree with that. I actually think organizations have the leaders they need. I think we haven't changed the environment that these leaders operate in for a very long time. And that needs to be the next frontier as we think ahead to the future.
Yeah, I think it's a great point. And I think about something like innovation. And I know you guys, design thinking is something you value as a skill at both of your companies, but you can't just teach somebody to say, here's how you run an experiment. they're not going to learn until they actually run an experiment and probably fail and iterate and pivot and do those things. And sometimes companies confuse, learning and impact with actually the experience of doing it, right? And more creating those opportunities is important just for not only for every employee, but for leaders. So Roger, how about from your side, any key success factors or insights around leaders and next generation leaders that you can share?
Yeah, I was just going to tag on to, we believe that experience is the best classroom. And while we kept saying digital first and we need to be thinking digitally, and we created all the learning resources that leaders needed for that and inspired them to think broadly around the digital landscape and so forth. That really wasn't resonating as much as we'd wanted to. And so we started saying, well, what are the outcomes? It's not about digital itself. It's what are the outcomes that you get from that around speed and agility and new forms of data that you never had access to, and ways of reaching customers in ways that we never had. And so once we started making those compelling arguments and started creating experiences, whether those were short-term experiences or longer-term experiences, we started to develop a capability that has started to take hold. And now we're intentionally moving people. We'll have really good leaders at the mid-levels in our clinical space or some of the other areas within health. And we have a digital health and analytics group. It's a fairly large organization within Humana. And we're making rotations through there to have these leaders who've not had that experience to go spend time there for 6 months, lead a project, and then come back. And it's just paying huge dividends for us to create the experiences versus trying to tell them what, or say, well, you use your cell phone and your mobile, so why wouldn't you do that for your job? The last thing I would say on that, Scott, is and Sarah, the tools are becoming extremely accessible to leaders. And so the ability to scale a digital environment is becoming easier and easier than it was even 5 years ago, 3 years ago. So low code environments, no code environments, the automation tools that are now available to leaders and their teams is becoming immensely accessible for lots of different individuals. So digital is no longer relegated to the IT department, the digital group, the coders, and the programmers, and the deep data scientists. It's now becoming much more mainstream in our organization.
Yeah. So the hurdle to engagement's a lot lower if you're willing to lean into it. And then I'd love to hear from both of you guys. Where have you had to challenge the HR model? Because you mentioned these tours of duty. I'm sure that wasn't part of your normal career pathing at Humana. So any comments on where you've had to challenge a traditional HR model about how people progress and learn and get experiences?
Yeah, we've challenged, a lot of our career framework and even some of our compensation practices, because we had the career framework where people needed to be slotted into certain types of positions, and you didn't feel like you were growing if you didn't move and have title changes and things like that. And we've had to rethink a lot of that to say that it's Sarah was making this point about range is really trying to help people understand it's the breadth of their experiences and what they're putting in their experience portfolio than it is a title or a level. That because we talk about being enterprise leaders, and you can't be an enterprise leader unless you have experienced multiple parts of the organization. And to facilitate that movement, we have to make it easier. So we've challenged a lot of our HR paradigms around that, because once you get into a hierarchy, then movement sideways and horizontally, moving into a lesser position because the experience will be great, and then it's just hard to go just completely against HR models and somewhat against human nature in some ways.
How about you, Sarah? Any way you've creatively created these micro experiences or tours of duty? Or?
Yeah, I mean, I would agree. We're probably more traditional in that when we think about moving individuals around and mobility, we think about moving them to a new job, putting them in a different geography, a different business unit, working with a different manager. And when all of this happened, it challenged our model, because all of a sudden there were new opportunities that were created for the company, which was great, from the crisis, but we didn't have a job for them, right? There was no one in a job that had been thinking about them. And very quickly, we had to redeploy resources to specific opportunities. And we did it. It was painful, but it brought to bear that model, that more traditional job career model, is not really working for the future. And so what we're now building is our own internal talent marketplace, where we can take advantage of different opportunities and projects as they come up and not be so reliant on the more traditional hierarchical structure. Another area that we were challenged was around objectives. So we set annual objectives every year, and our workforce came in, and we're on a calendar year, so they set them with gusto in January, and then all of a sudden in March, the rug got pulled out from under them, and they said, wait a second, how am I going to meet my sales targets? What does that mean for my comp? And there was a lot of anxiety about that. So again, just thinking about how our people practices need to evolve, be more flexible, be more dynamic, so that we can support our business as these changes, these unprecedented at times, and unpredictable changes occur.
Danielle, maybe we could run the next poll. And this poll is going to be around what you guys perceive as your challenges in your companies and organizations. So we're going to go to Menti again. I think Danielle, if you could pop that up. Great, thank you. So if you guys can go to menti.com again, and same code 920581. And what will be your biggest challenge as an organization going forward in a post-COVID future? Going paperless. Good. You can type in anything you want. Interesting. We haven't talked about real estate. That could be a whole nother panel. Customer employee engagement. And digital and physical. Motivation. So quite a few on the, some around process, some around mindset shift. Any reactions to some of these, Sarah, Roger, you're seeing?
I mean, many of them definitely resonate for me. The older leadership is interesting. We had actually, we conducted a couple of surveys during the crisis specific to COVID and how the organization was responding. And we asked a question around when people, or if people would feel comfortable returning to the office. What we found was more of our older workers said they would be more comfortable to return, but didn't really want to return. And our younger workers said they weren't comfortable returning. A lot of that was rooted in mass transit and other issues, but that they really wanted to return. And so, you know, it was really interesting to dig in and even look at some of the generational differences around what people were dealing with. You know, my own personal situation, all of a sudden I was at home with a spouse that was also working from home, who typically travels during the week, 2 children that were being homeschooled and doing distance learning. And all I wanted to do was get out of my house and get back to the office. But everybody's experience was very different in what they were dealing with and some of those constraints. And the office one, I think, is fascinating. We had a focus group this morning. Scott knows because he's helping us on some of our future of work conversations. And we put up a question and asked people to vote on the side they felt was more true. And the two sides were the office for the future, the office is dead or the office prevails. And we made people pick a choice. And some of the comments around the why were actually fascinating. There's a big divide there.
Yep. Yeah, and I think it really does go back to industry and even region of the world in terms of behaviors and attitudes. Like we did some roundtables with law firms, and the divide there was enormous, right? So you had older law firm partners that just could never see a world where mentoring and apprenticeship as part of that journey, and that has to be done in a physical way, right? They couldn't let go of that. And then younger partners were like, no, of course we can do it, right? Of course we can do an apprenticeship in a virtual world. So it is a little bit, less about age and more about how entrenched your mindset is and how willing you are to pivot off that. I don't know, Roger, any reactions?
Yeah, a couple. I'll tag on to the space issue, and then I would like to just make a couple quick comments on culture and engagement. On the space issue, that's how we need to think about it as well. Is thinking of the physical space as one alternative that everyone has, and it could be many different alternatives. And the challenge that we have and is the paradigm. Because I know most everyone has their organization say this, but we say, well, we're an organization built on relationships, and you hear that just time and time again. So it feels like it's pretty trite, but there's some wisdom under that in terms of building. Our company's built on relationships, and so how do we use the physical space to maintain that development of relationships when we're going to be in a much different future of work and a different way of working? And so we're trying to wrestle with that and sort of challenge some old paradigms around how that gets done and what physical space gets used, how physical space gets used to do that. And then on the paperless, I think a couple of people mentioned paperless, which was, we were kind of forced into that because based on our regulatory requirements and some of the liabilities and regulations we have about personal health information, we're not allowed to print at home off of our computers, our company computers. So we were all forced to go paperless unless you wanted to wander back into the office and take your chances of going back in there with a mask on and all of that. So it forced us to go paperless in a very short period of time. Last piece on culture and engagement, I think that's an important part, and that's the other thing that we're wrestling with is how do we maintain that engagement and the cultural elements that were some of the best around what we did around our purpose and in fact, one of our values is thrive together. And so how are we rethinking that value when we're not together and not physically in the same place a lot for either big, large meetings that are common in our company to just being on the same floor in the same workspace. And I'll just give you one idea that, a lot of our meeting rooms are huddle rooms, and so there are 5 to 6 people, and we're thinking about turning those into really, really high-end studios because we already have the video equipment in it. And if you can't cram 6 people in a room, not anytime soon, how do we turn those into almost production studios for leaders or 1 or 2 leaders to really reach a big part of their audience and a big part of their teams and large parts of their organization in an environment that's much more stable and reliable than working from home on something like Zoom. And so we're rethinking some of those ways that we're using physical space to then bring our culture even more alive and engage our associates as well.
I actually think that's Roger, that's a fantastic point. Actually, I love that idea. I'll probably steal it from you. But I think that's actually an excellent point around not just thinking about the home being where we need to support virtual stuff and the office being where we need to support physical stuff, but how you actually do both. And we're starting to explore a lot of these contradictions that are coming up, brought to us, because of the crisis around how can we, be far away, but still feel like we're near, and trying to solve for those contradictions in the best way possible, and really thinking that virtual physical. So it's not an either or you only do virtual here and you only do physical here, but how you can actually do them both in different ways.
Yeah, I think the key message from both of you, which we're hearing also from other kind of progressive companies, is we're definitely not going back to the old way, but the new way will probably be some balance. And in many ways, the opportunity, but also the challenge is the expectations will be higher. The expectations will be that both customers and employees will be able to choose where to turn the dial on what's the optimal mix for them personally in terms of virtual, physical engagement, and to your point, how they can mix and match those to achieve the best outcome, achieve the most productive environment. And I think, you look at some of the tools out there that even, Zoom's great and all that stuff, but moving to the next version, right? So you look at Oblong Mezzanine and Spatial and these platforms that could allow us to move to 3D and even tactile interactions. It's pretty exciting because those might also advance and bring a little bit of the physical to the virtual and vice versa. But there's lessons to learn from not only retail, which we talked about before, but look at what's gone on in education, right? So there was this period of time where everybody said online education is going to blow up education. And universities were all scared about MOOCs and massive online courses. And of course, the universities aren't exactly the most innovative platform or sector, but at the same time, what you realized was the students didn't want just online education. They wanted this balance. And that's why you see most of these models netting out of some balance of online and physical. And even I think where we'll go after this crisis will be some balance. And that'll be probably very consistent with how the work experience is going to change.
That's right.
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, my children are very worried that there will be no more snow days ever in their future. So
yeah,
that's a big debate in our house.
I think workers are saying the same thing.
Well, Scott, just to tag onto that on the education side, I was reading an article over the weekend about the success and not of MOOCs. And one of the real interesting points in there is that a lot of the studies they've been doing on online learning is that the ideal online learning, we're thinking about a 1 to several hundred. And we're thinking about the models of scaling online learning, and it's actually creating the best of all that to say, no, we need to use online learning to figure out how to create the intimate experience that you get in a class. So I don't know how that plays out, but it's just an interesting way that we're blending this need to be connected with the digital tools that we have at our disposal.
Yeah, it will truly be about delivering personalization, the best of personalization. So we had a couple questions coming in from the audience. One was, more practical around, I think, Sarah, you started to get at this. What if people aren't set up to work virtually in their home or don't have the best bandwidth situation or even working environment physically to set up? How are you dealing with some of that?
Yeah, and that's a significant challenge, both in more developed parts of the world. So I know certainly we dealt with it where even in the developed parts of the world that had access to Wi-Fi and other things, for all of our employees to be on our network at the same time created some tension and created some challenges when we first started this journey. And so we had to pivot very quickly. But then in addition to that, we have a huge number of our workforce that are based in India. And, when their work from home orders got instituted and many of them had to work from home, the infrastructure in the country is just not there to be able to support that. And so that was a significant challenge. And one of the things, if we think about organizational resilience that we're starting to do now, is think about how do we support a more distributed workforce based on some of these challenges, either our own internal infrastructure challenges, where we need to have enough VPN capacity to be able to support a large number of our workforce being remote. And then what's our role in helping support our workers that might be in a location, a less developed location, where because of external factors, they're not able to have the setup that they need. So it's an ongoing challenge. We haven't figured it out, but I do think we've learned a lot through this process and are now on a road to be able to put some of those things in place.
And Roger, you hit on culture and purpose, and even communication by leaders. How important is that when you potentially could have this divide in your workforce? So the people that have to go on the front line that might even be resentful of the people that can work virtually. How do you keep everybody glued together?
Yeah, it's interesting, and so a couple of things there that kind of goes into your question. The way that we are doing that now is we have about 2,000 employees who have to be at work. They're in our pharmacy distribution centers, and we have to make sure that our members and our customers are getting their prescriptions during this time, and mail order means and some other things. And so we have done some things with that group and recognized them. And it reminds me a little bit of my days when I was at Walmart, where the store employees were the most celebrated in the company, still are today, because you can't close the doors. And so the employees that we have in our company that can't close the doors, and it's not just pharmacy distribution. We had our data centers and some other areas where we really had to accommodate that. But an interesting thing, Scott, as I mentioned, that we had a fairly significant section of our workforce that was already working at home and working remotely. What we found is they actually felt more included and more engaged when everybody else had to go work at home. Because if you just think about it, and it's obvious once you stop to think about it, if you have a team of 5 and 3 are in the office and 2 are trying to dial in from remote places, if you're dialing in always remote and you only get to fly in once a month or once every other month to see your teammates, it's not always easy to feel included. Once everybody had to go home, the work at home or working remotely employees felt much more part of the team. And it was just an interesting dynamic. So I think the heart of your question is that in this new environment, how do we continue to engage and reinforce the elements of our culture? And I don't think we've solved that yet. I think right now we're just relying on sort of over-indexing in communication and bringing people's personalities to life using virtual means, because it's not it's a pretty flat medium to try to do that. And so we're trying to do more of that in terms of, sort of just connecting people. But we're still solving that. We're still in the middle of this. And as we go through, we went through response. We're sort of in recovery, and then it's going to be moving to sort of reimagine and resilience and those kinds of things. And just to echo what Sarah said and just add one thing, is that one of the things that we're thinking about on not necessarily the countries where the infrastructure is a problem, but even our workforce, is really even rethinking their equipment issues, where we now are devising sort of bundles, these mobile bundles, whether you're in the office after this phase passes or not. We've got to make sure everybody can pack up and move, because we don't know when a resurgence will hit or the next kind of crisis will cause us to do that. And we have natural disasters and so forth, but we're rethinking the whole technology piece to say,
you need a home office in a box kind of
thing. Even if, we had people carrying desktop towers out to their cars when we were moving everybody home. And so just these really fluid bundles of double monitors and all that you can move and relocate very easily, or use a third party to do that, is kind of the way we're thinking about it.
Sarah, do you think this is an opportunity? Roger hit on leveling the playing field, and certainly we've seen it a little bit. Even in our firm, we ran a hackathon at Heidrick, and some voices got heard and actually had input into that, and got to collaborate with people across the globe that might have been in the back seat, right, in the dark shadows of the organization that popped out. Do you also think that gets pushed further in that traditional talent hubs, that people will now maybe push into less, more underserved cities or areas to develop skill sets and tap into talent pools that otherwise couldn't have been accessed that easily because you didn't have physical locations there? You see that happening more?
I think there's certainly, as organizations are thinking about the future, one of the things that we're seeing as a benefit is that if we can support a more distributed workforce, we can tap into talent that could sit anywhere. And what the other thing that we're hoping is that this will also help us on our diversity and inclusion fronts, so that, you know, we can go out and get the best talent wherever they're sitting, and not be concerned, Scott, to your point, that we don't have a major hub there, or we don't have an office, and we really need them to come into that office. I think the challenge, though, so I hope that that's true. I think time will tell. The skeptic in me says that I think one potential negative impact of this crisis is that we go back into this split model where we have, say, half of our organization in the office, half working remote. And so you don't have a level playing field. And we know from a lot of research that typically is what impacts culture the most. It leads to less productive teams. And so how do we balance that, where we may have some people whose preference is to come into the office and that they prefer to work in that mode, and then we have other people that would prefer more to work more remotely. And I think that's where the challenge comes in. How do you support both if you want to, but then what is that right mix? And if you're going to go with some sort of hybrid structure like that, what does that mean to your culture? What does that mean to your leaders who might have some people in an office and some people not?
And maybe those tours of duty, to your point, become a way to stitch people together, you know, which could be interesting. Yeah. How about you, Roger? Anything to think about that?
Yeah, we're distributing our hubs in various locations to do exactly what you mentioned. I think we're going to hit a place where we have a set of identified hubs. So it won't be anybody anywhere, but it'll be, you know, think of, we need a vice president of X, and you can live in any one of these 5 places or any one of these 8 places. And then, so we will do this sort of talent hubs, but in very strategic locations, and then give flexibility within that. And then the other thing that we're doing is starting to create distribution even within the larger cities that we have. So how can we have these sort of outposts where people can go and spend time and they're not commuting into the downtown tower or things like that. So we're distributing throughout the country, mainly in the US. We do have some offshore and international presence, but it's mostly in the US. But we're locating in talent hubs to give that kind of talent flexibility, but also get access to talent that we didn't have before. And then within our larger cities, we're sort of doing these smaller outposts where people can go in and get access and connect with people and do those kinds of things in a way that's a little bit easier.
Cool. Yeah. And by the way, please chime in your questions either on the chat line or Q&A. We had a question specifically about onboarding new young employees. What are you doing differently in this world as we figure this out to make that experience great, but also get them on the right path?
Well, I actually think this is a good example of not just trying to take what we used to do in the office and moving it to virtual. So we completely redesigned our onboarding experience, taking into account that we needed to be able to do it virtually. So equipment is now shipped to our individuals' offices, homes, for them to use. I was actually talking with a woman today who started with us in May, and I was asking her about her experience, and she was sharing, and she said, you know, the one weird thing for me is I don't have a badge. Like, I don't have a badge that says Mastercard, but I have the computer, and I have, you know, we send our people actually these, talk about physical and virtual. You would think we would go completely virtual, but they get it like a little pouch with a little welcome to Mastercard and a notebook and some physical things that they can actually touch so that we're connecting with them on both the physical and the virtual. The other thing, and I think this is an obvious thing, but we don't always do it, is just the importance of communication and connection. And so for all of our virtual hires, we're doing much more outreach now to get them to come to sessions with our CEO and other members of our management committee, to get them looped into some of our business resource groups that might be most relevant for them. So to really just try to help break down some of those obstacles that we probably had in the physical world too, but trying to make that virtual onboarding and then being able to develop relationships a little bit easier. And some of the work we're doing now, because many of our offices are going to be returning in a return to office mode, is thinking about, for those individuals that were virtually onboarded, what happens when they come back to the office for the first time? Because they've never set foot in one of our offices before. So what does that experience have to look like for them, which will be different for me, who had been working from the office?
Yeah,
So-
just to tag on to that, we're doing much the same things. And we had started this before the pandemic and certainly have accelerated it. But we have extended that whole onboarding and sort of redesigned that from sort of an agile team standpoint. And now when and we hire north of about 12,000 employees a year, but everyone, regardless of your level, gets a outbound call the minute you verbally accept. And that call comes to you and says, "Welcome to Humana. We're so glad to have you. I'm your personal concierge." And it's a light touch kind of concierge that uses digital tools to connect that new employee to the company. And so once they verbally accept, within 24 hours, they have an outbound call, and they have a digital assistant basically to help them onboard. And then that flows through to some of the things that Sarah mentioned. And then for executives, I mean, we have not slowed some of our hiring during this time, and many employees, if not all, of certain levels have been hired completely virtually. We've now had a number of executives that have been hired completely virtually. And if they had any meetings, it was probably one meeting in a park somewhere 6 feet apart from their future hiring manager. But I'll be quick. But we're now getting them together in cohorts to go through the deep dives into the company and the business model and the operating model and the kinds of things that you would expect if you were on site and in person.
Well, I know we're coming to an end. I think one of the things that is amazing about both your companies is the employee experience is as valued and important as the customer experience. And that's not where a lot of companies are, but you're seeing now, especially in a virtual world, that kind of attention. And you guys actually have people focused on delivering a great employee experience is probably going to be a differentiator, right? And who wants to work for you in this kind of world. Dean, you want to bring us home here?
Sure, happy to wrap it up. Roger and Sarah, thanks so much for joining us and for all of your insights. It was really terrific to have you. And, you think about the benefits of this, we're able to plug into folks like you, experts in your field that transcend geographies. And again, we're grateful to have both of you participate here and for your support. And Scott, thank you to you and your leadership globally in what you're doing around digital transformation, and really appreciate your leadership within PACT, within Forum. So thank you.
Thanks, team. Cool.
And certainly not last but not least, I want to thank Suzanne Lentz and Anexinet. Suzanne serves again as their Chief Marketing Officer, and Anexinet is co-lead host along with Fairmount Partners of Forum. We have more Forum series, summer series coming up listed here. Please mark your calendars, come back, connect in. One of the beauties of this is we have the opportunity to participate live and interact live with questions as well as polls, but you can also consume this asynchronously. And so we'll be sending this recording out for others and certainly forward on to your colleagues as well. We look forward to sharing our survey as well. Please fill that out. And of course, look forward to seeing you at a future PACT program, and in particular, the Forum Summer Series. Thank you all.
Thanks a lot, guys. Thanks so much.